Hello, everyone, and welcome to our June session of Dr. Spotfire. My name is Jose Aguirre from Typical Spotfire, and I'm here with Peter McInnes. Peter, you want to say hi to our audience?
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the architecture and data access of a series from the Spotfire platform. And the Spotfire platform is targeted to enterprise applications. You're gonna learn. We're gonna focus more on the analyst client, so you can learn more about this in a little bit. Here is a quick disclaimer. And our motto is learning is not driven by answers, but by questions. So keep the questions coming. That way we can engage more in having an interactive relationship with you guys. And that's how we learn more, just by asking questions, just not, it's not just the answers, but the questions that you might come up with. Subscribe for the recorded sessions here in YouTube. It's best to check it out in YouTube. It's better quality, but we are also live in LinkedIn and Facebook and other platforms. This session is going to be recorded, so make sure that you check out the links below and subscribe for upcoming sessions. We have this session every month at 9 Eastern time. Okay, so let's get started with the Spotfire platform, a series of, this is part one. And Peter, you want to go over the agenda and maybe introduce yourself for this series? I'm very excited to learn more about this.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Peter McInnes. I've been here at with Spotfire for 15 years now in various roles, but mainly working on the back-end architecture, security, installation, data access, things like that. So today we're going to talk about, we're going to start, as Jose said, a series of Dr. Spotfire's kind of more about the back-end architecture discussion. So today we're going to start with the platform, kind of give an overview of the Spotfire platform. It's not just Spotfire Analyst, but there's a larger platform behind the scenes. We'll show a little bit of the Spotfire Server web administration. We'll be delving into a lot of the specific aspects of that later on in other sessions. So today we're just going to kind of go an overview of that. Then we'll get into some data access and data consumption, and then talk about caching data in Spotfire. So to start off with, so the Spotfire, it's an enterprise platform. It's based on standards, it's secure and manageable, extensible, scalable, and observable. And as we go through the other sessions, we'll delve into the various aspects of this as we go along. We have many customers who are using Spotfire in an enterprise with tens of thousands of customers and many Spotfire reports and analysis files. The platform itself can be set up, on-premise or in the cloud, or we have customers with hybrid architectures. You can also install it on physical hardware, VMs, containers, or in a Kubernetes cluster. For standards-based, the components in the Spotfire environment, all the information is transported via HTTP and web service calls between them. We support integration into various authentication systems, and we'll have a whole session about authentication and authorization. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. You can monitor this system. We'll have another session about monitoring and logging in the system. You can monitor the system with various external and internally within it. It supports, we have visualizations, obviously using HTML. There's Tear and open source R and Python that we support. And then for data connectivity, we support standards such as ODBC and JDBC connectivity. So as far as the platform goes, so there's the client tier, which most people are probably familiar with as far as the Spotfire Analyst, where you can do your domain and all, you can have access to all the authoring capabilities, which is a thick client that's installed on your machine. And then you have consumer and business author, which are web-based clients. And those there's nothing installed there, it's just completely web based. And the business, so the consumer is just consuming applications, consuming already built analysis files based on what has been authored. And the business author allows users to edit or create new analysis files. And as time goes on, the business author is getting more and more of the functionality that the Spotfire analyst has as far as authoring, from doing all the authoring capabilities there. There's also the ability to have Spotfire on mobile applications. And then there's also web services that are available for automating aspects of the Spotfire environment, as well as running automation services, which we'll talk about in a minute, and other web services clients. So the Spotfire server is kind of the brains behind the operation. It handles what we call our Spotfire library, which is where you store the artifacts in the system. So it handles, and the library has a privileges or security around it about who has access to what within the library. But the library stores the Spotfire analysis files, metadata for things. It can store data connections and all sorts of other data functions. And it's where you store things to share with other people. And the library, the Spotfire server requires a Spotfire metadata database behind the scenes. That's supported on Oracle, SQL Server, and Postgres. And the Spotfire library is stored in that database, or it can also be stored on Amazon S3 if you want to store it externally. For example, if you have a large large library and a lot of things in the library to store, you can store it on S3 rather than storing it in the database. Spotfire server also handles authentication and authorization. So when a user logs in, if you're hooked up to another system, for example, Active Directory, Spotfire server handles the communication to verify that the user is authenticated correctly. And then within the environment, it handles the authorization, so controlling what users have access to within the environment. And again, we'll have a whole session about authentication and authorization. There's also, you can also audit. So what we call our user action logs and system monitoring allows you to monitor what the users are doing within the Spotfire environment, and also monitor some of the performance metrics like CPU, sessions, memory, things like that. So you can record what the users are doing, what analysis files they're looking at, what queries they're running. And then you can look at that over time to see, are things changing? Are analysis files actually being used? How much data is being used? We also have, the Spotfire server also handles the deployment areas. So deployment areas is where you deploy updates or customizations to the environment. You can use those to, if you want to test out a new update or a new customization, you can create a new deployment area and have specific users go to that deployment area and try that out. The Spotfire server also handles scheduling and routing. So you can schedule analysis files as well as route users to specific web players based on the analysis files they've opened or user and groups they're members of. So that allows one to scale appropriately within the environment, scale your web players appropriately, so you can control what analyses go to which web players and how they're utilized within the environment. You can also have people routed based on the user groups they're a member of. So maybe you have a department that has a specific set of requirements, and you want to send them to their own web player, or also a set of web players, or also for specific reports, you might have enterprise level reports, executive level reports that are critical, and you want to send those to different web players versus the web players that might be handling ad hoc users. You don't want to have those using the same web player necessarily. And also, Spotfire server handles information services, so that's allowing users to connect via Spotfire server to JDBC data sources, and we'll talk about those a little bit more later on. If you have multiple Spotfire servers, you have an external load balancer that supports session affinity. So most customers have multiple Spotfire servers to handle failover and load balancing. The other components in the system, so the Spotfire web player, which you mentioned a little bit, that handles the user interactions with analysis files. So the analysis files are loaded into the web player. And then when a user requests an analysis file, they can be loaded in the web player, or they can be scheduled, as we were talking about. So you can preload analysis files into the web player. So when a user requests one, they're all ready to go, and it just pops right up. So the web players are handling what the user interaction. So typically the web players there's more web players, and they're scaled appropriately with more resources than the Spotfire server. All the HTTP traffic from the clients is routed through the Spotfire server to the backend client nodes. So the Spotfire web player automation services, they run on the node managers in the background. And so the web player Yeah, it's where everything goes on. So you need to appropriately manage that as far as the resources. And we'll talk more about scaling and performance in another session. Automation services handles the what we call our automation services job. So a job is a series of tasks. A common job might be open an analysis file, send an email, or you can use it to update data about the analysis file. You can use it to embed data maybe, or save what we call our Spotfire binary data format data. We also have some other nodes. We have the ability to run typical enterprise runtime for R, the TER service. So that handles TER scripts, statistical scripts, and Python as a service as well. And again, those are both managed under the nodes. And those are used when you're calling data functions from web player automation services, since Spotfire Analyst itself has a built-in TER engine and Python engine. So typically when you're running the analyst, you're all running that locally, but in the web player automation services, you'd be running that within those nodes.
Okay, so Peter, depending on the type of deployment or use case that you are implementing in your enterprise, you might have these nodes required or not. Maybe you don't need the enterprise R if you're not doing so much analytics or things like that, and you are only focused in enterprise reporting. You might be good off with a couple of these nodes, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So most people have, most customers that I see, so going back up, you obviously have a Spotfire server and a web player. Typically, customers may not see a need for automation services to begin with, but usually they do use most customers use automation services in the end, but maybe when they're first starting out with Spotfire, they don't. But then the other ones, the TER and Python, yeah, are based on what they're using the environment for. So are they using data functions for TER and Python or not? So those aren't required, but they are useful. Most large customers do have one or both of those.
Okay, and one more thing: is it possible for you to put your mouse over the slide so we can know where you are referring to? Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's good. And another thing is that the Spotfire server. Did you already mention to have multiple servers when you have a large capacity, and then multiple also web players? Depending, you already mentioned that, right?
Yeah, I was talking about, so if you have, typically most customers have multiple Spotfire servers for failover and load balancing. And then typically, you have many more web players than you have Spotfire servers to handle the load, the load of the users as well as the analysis files. Yeah, so most enterprise customers do some scheduling. So that means the analyses are preloaded using what we call scheduled updates. And then that requires the data to be in memory, and it requires hardware for that as well. And then also the number of concurrent users. If you have a lot of users using the environment, then you also need the web players to handle those as well. Did that get to your question?
Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
Okay. So I'll move on. So there are some other services as well that are they're not part of the node manager. The worker services are kind of outside. So we have Spotfire statistics services for other advanced statistics, advanced data services for data federation and virtualization, data streams for streaming data, and then Spotfire data science for, again, more advanced data science work. In addition to all the components we have the ability to extend the environment. So one of the big ways that people extend the environment is the Iron Python API. So scripting within the environment. You can also do the Iron Python API is built on the Spotfire software development kit. So the calls you make within the Iron Python API are part of the SDK. You can also do more advanced customizations using C#. So you can have tools. For example, you can have some sort of tool maybe that does some sort of subscription or something, or a custom data source. Maybe there's a data source that doesn't kind of fit in the ODBC, JDBC realm, and it's more maybe an API. And for example, if you're familiar with the OSI Pi custom data source we have on our community, that's built on the the Spotfire SDK. So you have a lot of, there's a whole page, and last month's Dr. Spotfire was about extending Spotfire as well. So they went into that more in there. There's also the mods.
Yeah, sorry. And we also did last month extending a Spotfire, so we went over all of these.
Right,
So
right.
it's a recorded session, and we're going to make sure the link is below, or just visit the Dr. Spotfire office hours in our community pages, and all the previous recorded sessions are there.
Right, yeah. We also have the mods API. So the SDK can be used to create custom visualizations, but now with the mods API, it's faster and quicker to get going with the mods API, because you just have to do JavaScript programming and use that API. The Spotfire JavaScript API. So one thing I want to say here is you can do JavaScript within Spotfire itself, within the text areas and everything, but that's different. The JavaScript API allows you to embed Spotfire within portals, and customers use that a lot to provide advanced analytics and visualizations within their portals when they're extending the environment out to their customers.
Exactly. And there's not public API for the JavaScript that you use on text areas, but when you are developing mashups or web pages, and then you can use the Spotfire API to put those visualizations and different aspects of Spotfire within your corporate web page, right?
Yeah, correct. Yes, yeah. And then you can have that visualization interact with the portal if you need to. So maybe there's some sort of context that they're in, and then within that you can pass that information to Spotfire, and then the visualization they show is relevant to what they're looking at in the greater portal that you're in.
So we can say that Spotfire is not just a tool; it's a platform.
Correct. Yeah. Platform for doing all your enterprise reporting.
Yeah, and it can be extended in so many ways.
Yeah. There's also Spotfire Server Web Services, so for running automation services that we talked about, and various other things. So there's a lot of hooks within the Spotfire environment. Too many to go through in this session, but there are a lot of ways to extend it, and there's a lot of stuff on the community about extending Spotfire. Some of the web services are, for example, user directory and the library services, so you can manipulate the library and manipulate what we call our user directory, which is the users and groups information within Spotfire externally. And then there's the ability to customize, extend, or the Spotfire iPad app, so you can customize it for your environment. Customers will do this to put it in their own app store, have some of the settings pre-configured, and brand it, so it's branded for their environment.
Yeah. So you're going to be covering all other topics in the next Dr. Spotfire next month, right? You're going to talk about authentication, monitoring, diagnostics, performance, scalability, and things like that, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the next one will be authentication, authorization. Then we'll get into more, monitoring, diagnostics, and things like that. So I don't want to spend a lot, or we could go through all that today, but we wouldn't have time to do everything else.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on. The next slide, we already went through this, but just to have it here within the slide so people can see it. So this is all the services that Spotfire Server provides. We went through all that already. Now I'm going to flip over and show the web administration console. So this is the logging in. I've logged in as administrator here. Most customers would log in and probably see, maybe this view, which oops, I guess I got to log back in. It looks a lot like Spotfire Analyst. Sometimes I get confused between the two of them, but this is kind of the business author and viewing of things. But I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to stick more here. So let's start with the library. So again, we'll have a little more detail about the library when we talk about authentication authorization, as far as permissions within the environment. One of the things I want to point out here is the ability to view the version history. So starting with Spotfire 12, items saved in the library have a version history. Now those who are upgrading from a previous version will not have the version history turned on, and the reason for that is this can lead to obviously a larger library footprint. So we didn't want to turn it on automatically for users. So you can go through. There's a support knowledge base article about enabling version history in the library. So if you're interested in that, you can search for that knowledge base article and turn on version history in your library. But then you're aware of it. If you're installing 12.0 brand new, it will have the version enabled. But within that, so you can see I have 3 versions here, so I can click on this one, I can restore this version, I can save this one as a new file, etc. And I can, add things to it. So I'm not going to spend too much time again, like I said here.
Yeah, that's really good. I have a question. So if I upgrade after this version that has the version history, I can also have the option to carry over all the history of the versions that have.
Yeah, they would all be in the library with the with the analysis files. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, and so I guess so these all are stored in the library. So that is the reason the library can kind of grow if you have a lot of versions. There are commands for deleting library versions if the administrators on the call and are familiar with the Spotfire. The Spotfire server has a configuration command line which can be used to configure the environment. Typically used a GUI, but from the command line you can do all the configuration. But also there's some commands for controlling the environment over time, and one of those is the ability to delete versions based on various attributes. Right here, I'm showing the latest LTS 12.0 version. We're up to 12.4s in the mainstream, and as time has gone on, more attributes have been added to that delete, or more control has been added to that delete library versions command. So during the next, if customers are just on LTSs, during the next LTS, if they're looking at the controlling the library versions in the controlling the library number of versions that they keep or delete or prune, then there'll be more features in that as time goes on.
Yeah. And guys, if you have any questions, just feel free to put it in the comments. We're monitoring the comments live and also answering those questions live.
Right. So next thing, I'll go on to users, and I'm not going to, again, I won't spend too much time here because we'll be doing whole authentication authorization, but just to show you can now within the, for those who might be used to, older versions, we're adding more and more to the web interface here as far as controlling users and groups. So in the past, you had to do a lot of this stuff through the analyst client, through the administration manager, but within here now I can click on my user, I can view the licenses. If I go to groups, I can edit, the licenses since those are done by groups. And one thing to note here is I'm just using the Spotfire database here. I'm not hooked up to an external Active Directory or LDAP. So all my users and groups are, local or system. I don't have any external groups or users. So that would be something that someone would have in another system that might have different, might see different things here as far as the users and the groups available. I can manipulate any local groups, but if I were hooked up to an external system, I wouldn't be able to manipulate those except for within the Spotfire attributes. So I could control the licenses for those groups, but I couldn't add members to those groups if they're managed in an Active Directory, for example, because the group management is managed externally. The next section is scheduling and routing. So from within here, I have some rules set up so I can, again, and most customers have, might have hundreds or, rules here. I have a very small environment here, so I only have a few rules set up. But again, the rules allow you to control how an analysis is scheduled, as well as controlling where a user might be routed to within the environment. I only have one web player in here, so it's not really interesting. But most customers have obviously many multiples of web players. You can control the routing based on resource pools, so you can add web player instances to resource pools, and then have those resource pools. They're tied to a web player instance, so the user the rule is based on the resource pool. The user is sent from when the user logs in to Spotfire server, and they request an analysis file. The rules, and if there's a rule for that analysis file, and it'll send them to the resource pool. The web players within the resource pool that are part of that rule. So it allows you to kind of manage, how the users are, where they're sent to, as far as, and then you can manage the scalability and the memory and resources being used.
Hey, Peter, we have a comment, a question actually from Srinivas Mamidala. Hope I said it right. Why don't we have a Spotfire alert mechanism in Spotfire by default?
Yeah, we don't have an alert mechanism right now in Spotfire. I mean, I know it's one of the features that that is widely requested and people want to put in there. But yeah, I think it's just I don't. There are some extensions to that, but yeah, they're You
Well,
can do some stuff, but you can't do everything. I mean, you can't. Yeah, there is some stuff you can do, but it'd be great to have a more built-in link.
and if you have any ideas, you are always welcome to put it on the ideas portal. You can search ideas and vote for them, or you can just contribute with your own ideas.
Right. Yeah.
Ideas.tipco.com. I'll put the link below as well.
Okay. There's probably already one for alerting in there. And depending on how complex, you can do some with automation services or depending on what you're wanting to alert on. If you're wanting to alert on data within an analysis, then you can do some stuff with automation services. But again, it's not as complex as probably what people might want. So back to the so the scheduling and routing, you can do you can control the roles here. You can look at the activity. So again, most customers have a big long list here. You can see what's failed, what's succeeded. One of the things about schedules that I'll just point out. So this is we'll look at this schedule for a second. So this schedule is loading something from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm only loading this one time a day. You can update the data during the day. So again, this is a schedule that loads the analysis in the morning at 6 a.m. and takes it out of memory at 10 p.m. at night, Eastern time. But you can have data updates. So if your data updates maybe every 1 hour, every 2 hours, you can do that within the environment as well if you need to. Automation services, so you can schedule jobs here. You can also call automation services remotely. They're via web service. There's also we provide a executable that you can use to call it, but you can also call the web service directly from a program. I don't have any scheduled jobs here or job activity, but this is where you can view what's going on within the automation services environment. Deployments and packages, we talked about this earlier. So this is where you can control updates to the environment as far as client packages. So you load packages, you push these out or these are pushed out to the nodes. I would update nodes, and then for the Spotfire analyst client, next time they log in, they would get the updates. You can also have multiple deployment areas if you want to test out a new update or a customization. You can create another deployment area for that. Nodes and services. This is where people would see all their nodes and services. I only have one, so it's not really too interesting. But this is where you can, I can create a new service within this environment if I want to have multiple web players or automation services within here. This is also where you would create TER and the Python services that we talked about, which typically the TER and the Python nodes services, run on their own nodes based on how they interact with things. So this is the resource pools I was talking about. So you can have resource pools and assign the various web player instances to it. Again, I only have one instance, so it's not really interesting. But you can assign multiple instances to one resource pool, and then you can have those analysis files be balanced across those those instances based on how you've assigned them in the rules. I won't spend too much time on monitoring diagnostics because we'll spend a whole session on this. But as far as this is where you can view logs. You can kind of get an overview of the instances of how things are going and everything. You can also drill down into the instances and see a snapshot of the performance right now, of the performance metrics and performance counters and everything, the metrics of how things are working right now. The action logs as well as the performance counter logs themselves would give you a historical information that you can view over time.
Peter, I have a question on another question from Jesse. It says, is there any effort to include monthly scheduling? And I think you can just change that in the configuration options to have it every month or weekly or whatnot, right?
I don't know if that's applying to automation services or to the scheduling of the scheduling and
the
routing, because because in here you can, I mean, if you mean this, if it's here, the schedules are,
Yeah.
you can control, I mean, I can have this scheduled all day or something, all the time if I wanted to, but yeah, if it applies to here, automation services, it might be automation services where I don't know if you, I think the scheduled job is only, yeah, it's the same schedule. So I can't do, on the first day of the month or so there's probably an idea and an ideas for that, but again, there's probably the place to go.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's part of our roadmap.
Yeah. One last but not least. Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, there is an update analysis web service that can be called as well. Yeah, yeah. A lot of customers use that to trigger a scheduled update externally, so you can trigger the update and analysis based on maybe some data. Maybe the database is finished running, and then you want to trigger the analysis to update, and you don't know the time when that data may be available. Maybe it's not always at 1 a.m. Maybe it's sometimes it runs over or something, so you can't schedule at a specific time every day. Last but not least, one of the things that you can do is you can run the Spotfire server configuration I was talking about as far as an administrator. You can run this externally to the Spotfire server if you want to maybe do some controlling of the environment outside of the Spotfire server. Maybe you want to run some, automate some processes. The key thing is you'll need to have access to the Spotfire database from that machine that you're running this on, because you have to create a bootstrap file and bootstrap the system and everything. So now, well, I'll go ahead and answer some of the questions. Deployment areas are stored in the Spotfire database. Yeah, there's deployment area. Yeah, deployment areas are stored. You'll see them underneath the Spotfire server, like on the disk, but the main place they come from is that's only temporary. That's so they don't have to pull from the database every time. But the deployment areas and all that, all the updates, the SDN files, the Spotfire SDN files are stored in the database.
Yeah, just to wrap up that, deployment areas is, for example, you have a bunch of plugins and you're using certain extensions. You have that deployment area for that specific group maybe, or you have a deployment area if you want to test an extension that you build, things like that.
Right. So yeah, I'll go through these and then we'll finish. I'll get back to the questions in a minute. But so there are various ways to deploy Spotfire. So one of the ways is the customers are doing it on premise or in the cloud themselves, or maybe using Spotfire PSG, but they're controlling the environment, the upgrades and everything like that, and they have control over everything. They have access to the physical hardware of the machines and everything. There's also Spotfire Cloud Enterprise. In this case, this is where TIBCO is running this as a single tenant system, Spotfire as a service. So each customer that runs Spotfire Cloud Enterprise is running their own tenant. So there's no sharing among tenants in this case. In this case, most of the components are available. There is a capability matrix available that if people want to see what's not. But with the Cloud Enterprise, pretty much everything is available. There are a few things that are missing. I don't know them off the top of my head. But typically, with the Cloud Enterprise, we work with you. We get this set up. Sometimes we'll hook back to your local network using a secure VPN, and so we can get to your data sources and maybe your authentication systems. Then there's TIBCO Cloud Spotfire, which is the public cloud. This is a multi-tenant environment where just everybody's all in the same environment, all the analysis files and everything. So this is obviously has a lot of restrictions on it. The data you can get to is limited because we can't run we can't hook to your data source. It's on premise from a public cloud environment.
Yeah, it's for security purposes, and this is also the TIBCO cloud is that the one you use when you sign up for a trial version.
Correct. Yes.
But you can also go on the analyst and do.
Right. From the analyst, you can still do everything. It's just if you want to use the web player environment, then that's limited. But yeah, from the analyst, you still have access to everything. You're correct. Then there's typical Spotfire for AWS. This is for customers who may want to just try out the whole stack. This is a single AMI with all the components of Spotfire server, the web player, and statistics service all in a single AMI. You can go up to this AWS marketplace and spin this up, and then test it out. The other thing that was added in Spotfire 12.0, there's a cloud deployment kit. So this GitHub repository contains recipes for Spotfire containers and Helm charts. So you can take these scripts, modify them for your environment, and spin up a Kubernetes cluster of Spotfire. We have a lot of customers doing this and starting to do this. Actually, the public cloud, the typical cloud Spotfire runs on Kubernetes at this point and has for a while. So before I move on, I'm going to, let's see. So there's a couple questions about installing Python and R services on the node manager. Now, the Python and Terra can be installed on Windows or Linux. It's not just a Linux system. So yeah, no, they're not. It's not just installed on a Linux system.
Okay. Digital Doc says we're switching from NAS to S3 as storage. Does typical Spotfire supports S3? Because they can configure in the library path.
Not sure which library path. I mean, we do support S3 for the Spotfire library itself. The instructions in the manual for storing the library on S3. I'm not sure if that's the storage you're talking about or not, or if you're talking about data access as far as like a local So there's a library, the Spotfire library that you can put into you can store on S3, and there's also like an Excel file or a CSV file that you want to link to, and that may be a different that may be what you're talking about. I don't think we have a direct connection to S3 right now from Spotfire.
Okay, let's move on to how Spotfire consumes and accesses data.
Yeah, there's a Spotfire Cloud Deployment Kit question. No, the software is the same. The Spotfire software is the same that you use. So you still download it from eDelivery, and I use that software in the Cloud Deployment Kit. The instructions have the prerequisites of what you need to download from the eDelivery. So yeah, we're gonna have to. So I'll move on. So how Spotfire consumes and accesses data. So the first thing, there's in memory. So you pull all the data from the data source and put it into memory. Obviously, you can't do this with billions and trillions of terabytes of data. There's keeping the data external. In this case, the Spotfire environment creates queries and runs those against the data source and pulls in just the data it needs to visualize and filter and mark the data. Then there's also on-demand data. In this case, you're pulling a subset of data, usually again based on the user interacting with the analysis. So maybe start out with an aggregated data, and the user selects some points in a visualization or some parts of visualization, and then they drill down and get just a subset maybe of the outliers or something they're interested in within that data. And all these can be used together. There's no these can all be used together within the same analysis file. There's also streaming data, where you can pull in data that's streaming and watch a stream of data over time. The in-memory, external, and on-demand are all available within the add data table properties. So when you're adding a data to analysis, you can choose those. As we move on into how the data methods of data access, we'll talk a little bit about when you can do importing in memory versus on demand versus external. Some of the things about it, so within memory, obviously the data is loaded into the data engine. All the calculations are done locally, so you need to have enough memory to handle the data within that, whether that be within your local analyst environment or within the web player. You can go offline because you don't need access to the data source. And you can use data functions with this. In contrast to external data, where the data remains in the database, in that case, all the calculations and aggregations are done in the data source system. So you can be limited by the calculations that are available. This kind of depends on the data source and the connectors and what's available in the database itself. The other thing is the database needs to be able to handle the queries that are coming back. So you need to have it optimized for that. In this case, only result sets are returned. So again, this is useful for if you have, billions and billions or terabytes of data in a database. Obviously, you can't all fit it into memory. You want to get pieces of it out and use that and visualize that. Because the data is not in memory, you can't use data functions with it. You don't really have a quote unquote data table within Spotfire. And there's data on demand, which is again a hybrid approach where you're pulling subsets of data from the database to use. This is another good option. If you have too much data, you can start off with some sort of aggregation with the data and then drill down in as needed. So that's kind of consuming data. So ways of data access, you can obviously pull in text files. You can do information services. So it uses JDBC from the Spotfire server. You can cache data. You can direct query. So this is the external data or in database via the connectors. There's custom data sources that are available. And then you have direct connections via ODBC as well. So the data connectors. So this is the data connectors. The data starts in the data source. It's streamed to the clients from those data sources. The Spotfire server isn't involved. For the data connectors, it supports the the external. This is the kind of the external use case in memory and on demand. You can also do custom queries with this just out of the box. And we'll do a quick demonstration. Oops.
So the data connectors that you're about to show works the same regardless of the source, right? Most of them.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll just show a little bit of the data connectors. So one thing about the data connectors is, show some of the differences about things. So I have to have the driver downloaded to my client. So in this case, my analyst client or my web player client. In this case, I don't have the MySQL driver installed, so I can't use this connector. So that
has to be installed in the server or in the client.
Has to be installed in the analyst client as well as the web player automation and automation services. So any with the data connectors, the clients are connecting directly to the data source.
Okay.
That's in contrast.
If you're using web player, then it has to have that driver being on the web player instance. And okay.
Yeah, and that's in contrast to information services. So information services uses JDBC, and that connectivity is from Spotfire server itself. So in that case, you just need the drivers installed on the Spotfire servers. So in this case, this is how I like to usually get to it. And rather than scroll through the list, is just type what I need up here. And I've connected to this data source before, so it's okay. So I'm just going to bring up a kind of a quick. So this is the connectors. People probably have seen this before, but this gives you access to all sorts of features. I can define prompting. I can do a custom query. Within this custom query, I can add parameters. I can also do personalized parameters, which we'll talk about more when we talk about security and data security. The other thing I can do here is I can add related tables, and so it'll pull this up and add those columns. I control which columns are coming in. I can add another, data table. Let me just go ahead and click OK here and move on. So this is where I get to choose. So I can, here I can choose whether how I'm going to bring this in. So if I want to bring it in, as a, if I'm an importer, or keep it external. So in this case, I'll keep, I'll import this one. I'll keep this one external.
And another important difference between the information links and the data connectors is that in data connections, can you bring multiple sources together like you do with the information links, that you can have different sources and then merge them together?
Well, only within the same, I guess, yeah, you're right. Only within the same data source. So I can't join across databases.
But in information links, you can.
But information links, I could, yeah. I could. So one thing here I just want to show, I'll just so we'll just change this to a numeric column. So over here on my customer table, which I brought into memory, and you can see that I have lots of aggregations available because that's the data's in memory and it's being utilized within memory. Whereas over here with the external data, I have a limited subset of query aggregations because these are going to the data source. If I click this to average, that's going to the SQL Server database and running that query. If I were to change this to ship priority, then it's going to run that. There's only one ship priority, I guess. Order key or something like that. It's going to run probably too long. Let's cancel that. Order status. So yeah, as you can see, there's some differences there. The other thing about connectors versus information services is the data connectors. I'm connecting from my client right here, so my analyst client, and there's not really any control over how many connections I can have or how many connections everybody can have because everybody's can be connecting directly. I do have governance of things, so I can if I go in here and do the data connection properties, settings, I can save this connection to the library. So it's good to manage these connections in the library instead of in the analysis files, because if you need to change something or update them, you can go to the library and do that rather than having them all in the analysis in the various analysis files scattered throughout. You can also, if you're IT, you can create these. So if I go back to my, oops, I'm still logged in over my browser window. I can come in here in my analysis file and I can look at the Spotfire library and I can, so this is a connection I saved last week, and I can open this and get access to, I can log into the database and get access to the data tables saved within this connection. So as IT, I could create a data connection with specific queries in it, specific tables in it, and provide that to business authors and have some, some governance over it. But they could still then take that data connection and create any visualizations they wanted, assuming they had access to business author within the web browser. And it wouldn't need the analyst client to do that. So okay, I'm going to flip back over here. So so we've kind of talked about some of these differences between the data connections and information services. There are some useful links in the slides here that you can go to. These are all on the community site. So there's information about data connectors versus information on links. There's some data access pages, FAQ pages. There's built-in connectors. There's also some custom connectors that use the same framework as the built-in connectors. So if you're custom connectors, like we have one for Google Sheets or SharePoint Online Files, and various things like that. If you're interested, if you need to do those things. So one of the things, just to reiterate, as far as the difference between the connectors and the information services, the data connectors, a lot of times people will use those for ad hoc analysis because, as you saw, I could get up quickly and get going. If I had to log into the database, if I could log into the database data source, I could get going. Whereas information services, as we'll see in a minute, we'll go ahead and do. We'll go ahead and do show information services, how it's a little bit different as far as it requires. So it requires a little more metadata, which can be good for governance and everything. Again, and the information service connectivity, I've already logged in. I've created this data source previously. You can see it's uses a JDBC connection URL if you're familiar with that. It also uses connection pooling. So from the Spotfire server, so that you can control the maximum number of connections that are used at one time. Now, as these connections are used, or people stop using them, the connection will be used again, reused. So it's useful to provide some governance for that. But I do have to create metadata on here. So one thing you can do is you can go in here. If your data source has everything kind of already set up the way you want it to, as far as your views and tables, you can just create a default information model, which I did previously, and you can see it here. I have all the tables and information links. So if I edit this information link, I can look at the SQL here. This is the standard SQL. It's just basically select all the columns from the table. But I can do joins here. As Jose said earlier, I can actually do joins across data sources from within here. I have a join here that I created. This is within the same data source, but I could create joins across data sources if I wanted to, based on the within the information designer here. So this has a little more governance, a little more metadata. A lot of people use these. These have been around for a long time. Information services, and again, this connectivity is from the it's from the Spotfire server. So the data starts in the data sources, it goes through the Spotfire server, and then it's streamed to the clients. So in this case, the Spotfire server does not hold on to the data. It streams it through and to the various clients based on the queries. So I kind of showed information services already. I don't know if there's any questions or not. I can finish up. So there is, I said that Spotfire server doesn't hold on to the data. Well, one thing that Spotfire server can do is it can cache the data to disk. We also have the web player, which we've talked about a few times. So within the web player, we have the scheduled updates, caching, the data connectors also. I didn't show that, but you can also cache the data for a period of time within data connectors. So it doesn't have to always go back to the data source. So if people are doing the same query, instead of going to the data source each time, it'll use what's in memory. You can also use the Spotfire binary data format. You can put that in memory in the web player. You can also put those onto disk and cache with that. There's also you can also store embedded Spotfire files in the Spotfire library, or the SPDF files can be stored in the Spotfire library. Those aren't queryable, but they can be reused, across analysis. Yeah.
So a good example for the Spotfire binary data file is when you are creating maybe monthly reports, and then you can just do automation services to extract all that data, put it in the binary, and then have another report consuming out of it.
Correct.
Without having to do all the aggregations, going back and forth to the database and so forth.
Right. Yeah, the SPDF stuff's useful for a snapshot of the data. It's also useful if you have maybe historical data is fairly large, and so you want to take a snapshot of that. But then maybe today's data, isn't as you can add today's data to that. You can do something like that, some sort of incremental loading using historical data. But you can, as Jose said, you can use automation services to store that SPDF to the library or to disk somewhere, and then use that within an analysis file. Depending on if you have it stored in the library, you can actually pull SPDF data into web player. You can preload the SPDF data in the web player without having to preload the analysis file. This was initially done for the geocoding data, so that if you have analysis files using the geocoding information, they wouldn't all have to pull in the SPDF file and wait for it to load in. So we also have on the Spotfire server, there's a way you can cache information links to disk. That's a way to, if there's an information link that's used a lot, you can they can have a timeout on that cache, or you can have a validation query that goes back to the database, maybe to see if there's new data that wasn't there before. Then there's also Spotfire Advanced Data Services, which is a data virtualization federation layer where you can do advanced caching as well. So yeah, that's it for today. Again, we're going to have other sessions. I don't know if there's any other questions we need to go through, but yeah, so we'll be delving into other aspects of the platform in the next sessions.
So in the next section, you're going to talk about, we already mentioned, but just as a reminder, authentication, monitoring and diagnostics, performance, scalability.
Right. Yeah. The next session will most likely be authentication and authorization, and then we'll do the monitoring and stuff as another session. But yeah.
Okay, perfect. So if we didn't have a chance to go through the questions, we'll certainly follow up on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever you posted that question. And Is there anything, any final remarks? If there's something that you will take out of this presentation, what will it be?
Well, I hope
Peter?
everybody understands, yeah, that Spotfire is more than just, I know a lot of people just use the Spotfire analyst, and it's more, there's a huge entire platform behind it that can help you govern your environment and manage the the data that comes into it, and then obviously as we go forward, performance and everything as well. But there's more than just the Spotfire analyst. There's a lot of enterprise aspects to the environment that are useful and helpful as you deploy your analysis files to other users within your environment.
Okay, perfect. We have time for a couple of questions. Here's one. It says, how to optimize the performance of the report. Please let me know the ways. We already have had a session about big data and how to optimize the reports. I will also share the link. I don't remember exactly when that was, but if you go to the Dr. Spotfire office hours in the community, you will see the link of all the previous sessions that we had, or you can just go to YouTube, search for this channel, and those playlists have the quick tip videos and also have the live stream from each month that we had them. Let's see other questions. People are interested in the authentication presentation. So let us know what your expectations, so we can dive during the presentation beforehand. Thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
There's one last question. It's can we install standalone TER in Linux?
Well, you can technically. I don't know where. It's been a long time since I looked at the TER standalone to know where you download it from.
Yeah, because it's part of the platform, right?
Yeah, it's part of the. I mean, you can get to the end if you install, the service or whatever. You can get to the, just like I don't know if you're familiar with Analyst, you can delve down into the modules directory and find the TER engine within there. You can do the same when you have it installed on Linux. You should be able to get down to the TER engine if you need that. But I don't know if there's a standalone TER download to install. So we'll look into that and see.
Okay, guys. Well, if there are no more questions, I'm just going to wrap up and remind you that you can subscribe for the recorded sessions or for upcoming sessions, and see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys for leading.
Bye-bye.